My community didn't always have a neighborhood watch, but when there was a spree of cars being broken into, a few of us decided to start one. There ended up only being 3 of us on the watch, but we made sure to walk around the neighborhood every night to make sure that no one was doing anything they shouldn't be doing. And interestingly enough, it seemed to work. Whoever it was that was breaking into cars stopped, and it felt really good to think we were making a difference. That all changed a few weeks later though. The head of our group got a call from a homeowner in the neighborhood asking if we could do extra walk-bys of a house that they had just purchased and were in the process of renovating. Apparently, someone had broken in and had a party or something in the basement because the renovation crew found a wine stain in the basement. That night, we did a few extra walkthroughs of the neighborhood compared to what we usually did, but there wasn't any sign of any break-ins. The same can be said for the following night and the one after that. About a week or so after getting the call from the homeowner though, we got our first sign that something was wrong. It was around 11:30 that night, and we were on our 3rd walkthrough of the neighborhood when I noticed that the house that we were called about seemed to have a single light on in the basement that could be seen through the small window. I pointed the light out to the other members of the watch, and the first thing we did was contact the owner. I hoped that it was just one of the workers that had stayed late, but according to Josh, who spoke with the owner, that wasn't the case. They claimed that no one was supposed to be in the house and then asked if we could see what it was while they got in contact with the police. We were all reluctant to approach the house because as neighborhood watch members, we didn't have any real jurisdiction. We were mainly just lookouts that were there to call the police if anything bad happened in our area. But because the homeowner asked us personally, we decided to get closer to the house. I slowly crept up to the window to look inside, and the first thing I noticed as I got closer was that I didn't hear music or much noise at all. So I figured it couldn't be a party or anything like that. I got down on my hands and knees and leaned down to look through the window that sat at ground level and looked into the basement. I couldn't see much from my angle at first though and figured that the workers simply left a light on. I let the other members of the watch know that I didn't see anything, and Josh let the owner know. But the owner asked us to just double check that the door was locked, and if it wasn't, we should just turn the light off and leave. Josh made his way up the porch and into the house with the rest of us following quietly behind him. The door opened without a problem, which means that the renovators probably didn't lock it before leaving, explaining how someone managed to break in. We walked into the dark and empty home one by one, and we slowly made our way over to the only door in the hallway that had light coming from it. We knew that it had to be the stairs that led down to the basement, and I was the first one to head down. At first glance, I didn't see anyone or anything out of the ordinary. That is, not until I made my way further into the basement, which had been divided into 2 rooms. One room was entirely empty, but the other had my worst nightmare in it. I rounded the corner into the second room in the basement and stopped dead in my tracks. I realized right then that the red stain that the homeowner had seen in his basement wasn't a wine or alcohol stain, but instead, it was a blood stain. I know that because laying on the ground right in front of me in that room was the body of someone that I didn't recognize. I didn't get a good enough look at it before running away to see where the blood was coming from, but it had pooled enough on the ground for me and the others to be sure that they were dead. We ran as fast as we could back up the stairs, not even thinking about what would happen if the person who had killed them was still in the basement. There was no sign of them though as we ran as fast as we could out of the house and waited for the police to arrive. They confirmed that the person in the basement was deceased and then took statements from all of us. Neighborhood Watch got significantly more tense after that night, because we all knew that whoever killed that person was still at large, but there was no sign of who they were or where they went. Thankfully, nothing like that ever happened in our neighborhood again, and as far as we know, that murderer is long gone. One night while we were walking around the neighborhood, the rest of the members of the watch and I was surprised when we noticed someone that we had never seen before. It was a little after 10 p.m., so it was weird to see a stranger in the neighborhood walking the streets. But what made it more suspicious was that he seemed fixated on one house in particular, At first, we thought that it may have been someone's family member that was just walking around, but there was something about him that made him seem extra sketchy. And it turned out that our intuition was right when we saw him hop the small picket fence that lined the yard and then run over to one of the windows on the house. As soon as he started making his way across the yard, the rest of the neighborhood watch members and I started walking toward him. We didn't step in yet because we still weren't sure what he was doing exactly, but as soon as he raised what looked like a camera toward the window, we all took action. I pulled out my phone to call 911, and the rest of the watch called out to the man and told him to put the camera down. The man saw us and took off like a bat out of hell, and despite our best effort, he was able to outrun us and got away. We let the person who lived in the house know what happened and then told the police to be on the lookout for a man who was wearing a dark-colored hoodie and carrying a camera around his neck. Other than that though, there wasn't much we could do, and honestly we thought it was all over with. Boy, were we wrong. The next morning, I woke up with an uneasy feeling in my gut, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then a loud scream from my wife sent me running across the house and into the living room. As soon as I entered the room, I saw her standing in the middle of it holding something in her hand. She held it out for me to see, and right away I could tell that it was a picture. I started to breathe heavier and heavier as I got a closer look at the picture and saw that it was a picture of my house. I was about to ask my wife where she found it, but before I could, she told me to flip it over. There was something written on the back of the picture. It said, "You shouldn't have been watching me. How does it feel?" I knew right away that whoever took this picture was the same person that we had stopped from taking pictures of that house the night before. So I reached out to the rest of the neighborhood watch members. It turned out that we all got pictures of our houses taped to our front doors that morning. All of us were pretty anxious throughout the rest of the day, and that night, we made sure to be on the lookout for the man with the camera. But after walking around the streets for an extra 2 hours, we didn't see anything and ended up calling it a night. The next morning, though, I was alerted by a familiar sounding scream. Once again, I ran over to my wife, and before I got there, I knew that she must have had another photograph. This time, though, it wasn't of the house. Instead, the picture was of the neighborhood watch, and it looked like it was taken while we were patrolling the previous night. I flipped the picture over, and this time there were only 3 words. "You missed me." That night, we were all very vigilant on our watch, but we only made it about halfway through before I received a phone call from my wife. I answered it, and she was in tears as she cried out that there was someone at the house. My heart started pounding, and all I could think was that she was in trouble. I ran home as fast as I could, and the rest of the watch followed me. But when we got there, I saw no sign of anyone outside. I rushed into that house calling for my wife, and I was so relieved when she called back to me. I found her hiding in the bathroom, and when I asked her what happened, she said that she caught someone looking through the bedroom window at her. We called the police again and told them about everything that had been happening since the night we saw the man with the camera sneaking around the neighborhood. Over the next couple of weeks, the police patrols in the area became more and more frequent as people continued to report sightings of someone with a camera outside of their house, but he was never caught. After a while, my wife and I couldn't handle the stress and ultimately decided not to renew the lease on our house. We moved out of state and ended up leaving that horrifying chapter of our life behind us. I don't know if you remember the summer and fall of 2016, but it was one that the other members of my neighborhood watch and I wouldn't forget. I joined the neighborhood watch a few months after I moved into the house that I share with my wife, and it was actually really relaxing for the most part. We used to just walk around the 3 blocks that made up our neighborhood and nothing ever really happened, so it ended up just being pretty good exercise. The only time that we were ever on edge was during that summer with those damn clowns. We had all seen videos on the internet of strangers dressed up in clown costumes and walking down the street, but I for one never thought it was a real danger. But one night, as we were making our nightly rounds, we were all in the middle of a conversation when we were interrupted by an eerie laughter. It sounded like it was coming from around the corner that we were approaching, and even though we all thought it was nothing, I could tell that all 5 of us were a little bit on edge. As we got closer to the corner, the laughter seemed to be getting a little farther away, as if it was someone walking down the road. I held my breath as I was about to round the corner, and I know I wasn't alone. We all stopped on that corner as we looked down the sidewalk and saw the source of a whistling. Underneath the street lights, we could see a single person who is dressed in brightly colored, poofy clothes with bright orange hair on the top of his head. I looked at the other members of the watch and whispered to them, asking if they had ever seen anything like this in the neighborhood before, but they didn't answer. I asked them again, but this time a little bit louder. That was when one of them looked over to me and mouthed the words, "Be quiet." My eyes widened and turned to face the man who was walking down the street, only he wasn't walking anymore, and the laughter had stopped. I wanted to scream in terror, but I couldn't find the strength to make any noise as the clown slowly turned around to face us with a massive smile painted across his face. Even though he was at least 20 feet away from us, I could tell that his eyes were wide with excitement. To me, he looked like an animal who had just spotted its prey. As I watched the clown, my eyes drifted down towards something shiny in his hands, and when I realized that it was a knife, the only word that I could get out was "run." The other members of the watch and I took off as fast as we could in the opposite direction, but we could hear the man laughing as he chased us. We ran down the sidewalk and toward Cam's house because it was the closest one to us. Once we made it through his yard and into his house, we slammed the door shut and locked it behind us. Cam and his wife called the police as the rest of us watched from the blinds to see if the clown was still following us. I still remember the feeling of the chills that ran through my body as we spotted him walking up the pathway to Cam's porch. He tried to open the door, but when he realized that we locked it, all we heard was a loud slam on the outside of it, followed by the sound of laughter fading as the clown walked away. The police got to Cam's house about 15 minutes after we called them, and they claimed not to see any clowns on the street as they pulled up. They drove around the neighborhood the rest of the night and checked a lot of the yards, but according to Cam, they couldn't find anything. Even though we were safe, the next couple of months were very tense when doing our nightly neighborhood walks, and as more and more clown sightings started to pop up across the country, it only got worse. By that point though, a few other people in the neighborhood decided to join us, and eventually, all of the fear seemed to dwindle out of us.